a single sheet of paper, typed in flat, bureaucratic Vietnamese. A name, circled once in red pen. That was all it took. Not a uniform, not a weapon, not a single shot fired. Just a name, written down by someone who knew you, a neighbor, a rival, a man you'd argued with over a rice paddy years before. In 1967, deep inside South Vietnam, the CIA built a machine to win a war that couldn't be won with bombs or bullets. On paper, it was precise, surgical, a system of evidence, verification, and careful judgment designed to strip away a hidden enemy without touching the innocent. That was the promise. But somewhere between a filing cabinet in Saigon and a body found at dawn, something in that machine broke. And the man who built it, the man who ran it for years, would eventually be forced to answer for it, under oath, in front of the United States Congress. What he admitted that day still unsettles historians decades later. Because if you ask most people what the CIA did in Vietnam, they'll talk about spies, wiretaps, secret cables, crossing the Pacific. They won't talk about this. They don't know that a program built to find the enemy quietly became something else entirely. Something that would make ordinary people the most dangerous weapon in the entire war. To understand how, we have to go back to the exact moment the United States realized it was fighting an enemy it couldn't even see. By 1966, American commanders in Vietnam had a problem that no amount of firepower could solve. They could win nearly every battle, overwhelm every position, call in airstrikes that turned entire tree lines to ash. And yet, month after month, the same villages kept feeding the same insurgency. New recruits appeared, supply lines reopened, ambushes hit patrols in places that had supposedly been cleared weeks before. Because the war Washington was fighting on paper wasn't the war actually happening on the ground. Underneath the jungle campaigns and the body counts making headlines back home, there was a second structure holding the Viet Cong together. Not soldiers in the field, something far harder to kill. The Viet Cong infrastructure. Tax collectors moving quietly through hamlets. Couriers passing messages between rice farmers. Local recruiters, propagandists, quartermasters, ordinary-looking people, embedded so deeply in civilian life that they were, for all practical purposes, invisible. Kill 100 guerrillas in the jungle, and this network could replace every one of them within weeks. It didn't wear a uniform. It didn't carry a rifle in daylight. It looked like your neighbor, your shopkeeper, your local school teacher. And that was the terrifying part. In a war built entirely around identifying the enemy had simply stopped looking like one. By 1967, American strategists reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Conventional military power wasn't losing this war. It was irrelevant to it. You cannot bomb a filing system. You cannot ambush a tax collector's ledger. If the United States wanted to actually break the Viet Cong, it would need something entirely new, a way to reach inside the population itself and pull the infrastructure out, piece by piece, without leveling the village around it. That mission fell to a CIA officer named Robert Comer, a relentless, sharp-elbowed operator so aggressive in pursuing results that colleagues nicknamed him Blowtorch. Comer built a sprawling new command structure meant to fuse military and civilian efforts into a single, coordinated machine. Out of that structure came a smaller, sharper Unit 1 designed for a single purpose: to collect intelligence on the Viet Cong infrastructure and act on it directly. They called it ISEX. Within a year, under a former CIA station chief named William Colby, it would be renamed and quietly become one of the most consequential covert programs of the entire Vietnam War. On paper, the logic was almost elegant. Centralize the intelligence, verify it, strike with precision instead of chasing rumors through the jungle. A rifle shot, they called it not a shotgun blast. It was supposed to be the smart way to fight this war, the careful way, the way that spared the innocent and isolated only the guilty. The precision requires something the CIA was about to discover it didn't actually have in South Vietnam: a reliable way to know who the guilty even were. That question didn't stay unanswered for long, because the CIA and its South Vietnamese partners had already built an answer, a system designed to turn suspicion into certainty, one document at a time. It started small, a whisper from a police informant, a tip from a village chief, a report from a captured fighter, eager to trade information for his life. Every fragment of intelligence flowed into small joint command posts, rooms where American advisors and South Vietnamese officers sat side by side, cross-referencing names against files, building what they simply called target packages. 3 sources of evidence required. In theory, that was the rule. On paper, no one could be added to the list, no one could be arrested, captured, or worse, without 3 independent pieces of corroborating intelligence. It sounds almost reassuring. A safeguard built directly into the machine, a wall between an innocent villager and a body bag. But once a name cleared that wall, once it was written down, stamped, and filed, it stopped being paperwork. It became an assignment, and somebody had to go get them. That somebody wore no official uniform at all. They were called provincial reconnaissance units, small, brutal, fast-moving paramilitary teams, recruited locally, trained and funded through the CIA, and often led in the field by American case officers themselves. Their job was simple. In theory, move at night, hit the target, bring them back alive if possible. In practice, they operated with almost no outside witnesses. No press, no oversight, just a list of names, a weapon, and the darkness of the countryside to work in. Some of these units were disciplined, effective, exactly what the architects in Saigon had envisioned. But internal American reports, the kind buried for decades in classified files, tell a very different story about others. Units that use their authority to settle old scores. Units that threatened villagers with being labeled Viet Cong unless they paid up. A counterinsurgency tool, quietly repurposed into something closer to a protection racket, operating under the cover of national security. And for those who didn't rally, didn't escape, and didn't die in the raid itself, there was one more stop in the machine: the interrogation room. This is where the CIA's fingerprints go deepest. Years earlier, the agency had authored a manual, a detailed guide to psychological interrogation, refined and updated for use in exactly this kind of war. Its methods shaped how these rooms operated, how questions were asked, how resistance was broken down. A former American intelligence specialist named Kay, Barton Osborne, would later testify before Congress about what he personally witnessed inside those walls during his 18 months with the program. He described torture. He told lawmakers that, to his knowledge, not a single person he encountered in that process survived their interrogation. Officially, none of this was ever policy. Officially, this was never meant to happen. So somewhere between a filing cabinet with a 3-source rule and a body in an interrogation room with no witnesses at all, this system was supposed to protect the innocent. Instead, it was about to prove just how easily that protection could be stripped away, not by Washington, not by generals, but by the very people the program was meant to save. It didn't take corrupt generals or foreign spies to break the system. It just took paperwork and a number. Every month, district officers running the program were handed a quota, a target, a required count of neutralizations captured, rallied, or killed that had to be met, reported, and sent up the chain to Saigon. 1,800 neutralizations. Every month, think about what that actually means. Somewhere in Washington and Saigon, success had been reduced to a spreadsheet, a number that needed to go up, month after month, regardless of how difficult the intelligence actually was to verify. And when a bureaucracy needs a number to go up, it will find a way to make that number go up. A 1971 Pentagon review, buried for years before it ever reached the public, uncovered something staggering. Of everyone officially neutralized under this program, only about 3% were confirmed to be actual Viet Cong infrastructure leadership. 3%. The rest? Foot soldiers, low-level suspects, people caught in unrelated firefights and quietly reclassified afterward to help a district hit its number. And, disturbingly often, people who simply had the wrong enemy. Because once a village understood how the system worked, they understood something else too. A name on a blacklist didn't require a confession. It didn't require truth. It just required someone willing to say it. A farmer feuding with his neighbor over a rice paddy boundary. A jealous rival in a dispute over a woman. A debt. A family insult carried for years. All it took was a quiet word to the right informant, and the machine built to hunt communists would do the rest, no judge, no trial, no way to take it back. The very same system designed to protect innocent villagers from an invisible enemy had become, for some of them, the easiest weapon they'd ever have access to. And if ordinary people could turn this machine against a neighbor, imagine what a head of state could do with it. South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thu inherited access to the same apparatus, the same blacklists, the same units, the same interrogation rooms, all funded and built by the United States to fight communism. Declassified accounts and archival records now suggest Chu used that access for something else entirely. Not just eliminating Viet Cong operatives, but quietly moving against non-communist political rivals. Critics? Dissidents? Anyone inconvenient to a government fighting to hold on to power in a country running out of patience for the war. An American-built machine, meant to save a fragile ally, was being turned inward against that ally's own people for reasons that had nothing to do with communism at all. If a covert operation slipping quietly out of its creator's control is the kind of declassified history you can't look away from, you're in the right place. This is what we dig up at Redacted Skies, week after week, from files most people never think to open. Because by 1971, corruption at the village level and political purges at the presidential level were no longer secrets whispered in the countryside. They were about to land, in explicit detail, on a desk in Washington, in front of the one man who could no longer deny what his own program had become. That man's name was William Colby. Once the CIA's station chief in Saigon, now the architect and overseer of the very program, under fire. In July of 1971, he walked into a room on Capitol Hill to sit before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And, days later, a House subcommittee as well. Cameras rolling. Reporters waiting. The war in Vietnam already tearing the country apart at home. And now, for the first time, the American public was about to hear exactly what had been happening in its name. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. July 1971, Colby gave numbers, precise, official numbers delivered in the flat language of a man reading off a government report. From the start of 1968 through May of 1971, he testified. Approximately 20,000. 587 people had been killed under this program. Roughly 28,000 had been captured, another 17,000 had defected. Then came a second number. The South Vietnamese government's own count of the dead was nearly double what Colby had just given Congress. 2 governments, 1 program, and not even a rough agreement on how many people it had killed. But the moment that truly silenced the room came later, in a sharper exchange with Congressman Ogden Reed. Reed pressed Colby directly, did the United States actually know the difference between a member of the Viet Cong infrastructure and a loyal, innocent South Vietnamese citizen? Colby's answer was one sentence. No, Miss Congressman, I am not certain. The architect of the program, the man who had built it, defended it, and run it for years, admitting under oath that its entire foundation, the ability to reliably separate the guilty from the innocent, had never actually existed. This is the confession the file was building toward. Not a leaked memo. Not an anonymous whistleblower. The director's own words entered permanently into the congressional record, exposing the exact failure hiding beneath every safeguard, every quota, every blacklist we've walked through so far. The hearings that followed forced a question the government had spent years avoiding out into the open. How many of those 20,000 deaths were innocent people, caught by faulty intelligence? Investigators admitted, on the record, that they might never know. And yet, the program didn't simply vanish in disgrace. It was folded, quietly, into South Vietnamese police structures the following year, rebranded, absorbed, continued, which leaves historians with an uncomfortable, unresolved argument that still divides them today. Some point to captured Viet Cong documents as proof the program genuinely gutted the insurgency's network in certain provinces. Others simply ask, what number of innocent lives makes that kind of victory worth it? There is no consensus. There may never be one. What remains is simply this: a program built on precision, defended in the language of national security, that ended with its own creator, under oath, admitting he couldn't tell the difference between an enemy and a neighbor. It never really ended in 1972. It just changed its name. The methods built in Saigon, the informant blacklists, the coercive interrogation doctrine, the quota-driven hunt for an enemy hiding in plain sight, didn't disappear when the program was folded into South Vietnamese police structures. They traveled, absorbed into American-backed training programs that reached security forces in other countries, other wars, other decades. A blueprint, quietly exported, long after the jungle it was built for had gone quiet. That's the part that should unsettle you more than any single body count, because this was never really a story about one broken program and one lost war. It was a demonstration of what happens when a government builds a machine to identify the enemy and never fully reckons with the fact that the machine can't actually do that, not with certainty, not without cost. The paperwork looked precise. The reality never was. William Colby went on to run the CIA itself. No one was ever prosecuted for what that machine did in the villages of South Vietnam. And somewhere, in an archive that has still never been fully opened, the real number, the one Colby couldn't give Congress, the one no government has ever agreed on, remains exactly what it always was: unknown and, quite possibly, unknowable.